Steven Johnston, and Steven is a sheep farmer from Ballymena, County Antrim, and he's also a RoSA member, so he's a sheep advisor as well. And Steven, believe it or not, was down in Westport about, Jesus, dare I say, 20 years ago, and he was down at himself and a colleague of his. We got him down when we were starting the Mayo Blackface group about, must be 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and he's keeping in touch with us ever since. So you're very welcome to the area, and I've given him a time limit as well, so get going.
Do I need that? Yeah. Thanks, John. Thanks very much. Yeah, how to get a 30-minute presentation into about 15, John? As if it wasn't going to be hard enough for you probably to understand me, but there we are. Well, thanks very much, John. Yes, it's about 25 years since I was last down, and that hasn't really changed a bit, in all honesty. So it hasn't. But anyway, thank you very much. First of all, to Nick and family for inviting me along tonight. Also to Padraig for the premises, and to you all for coming out and sticking with us. It's fairly blowy out there, so no doubt maybe come in and, I was going to say share body heat, but maybe not. I'll maybe not go there. So I'll make a start. As John said, I'm an Easycare sheep breeder. Have that hat on. I'll have that hat on for a few moments, and then I'll move to
this one.
That one. Well, yes. Then there's a Cotter Agritech, which I'll maybe mention as well, and then I'll talk a wee bit about living with drench resistance, which is probably the main reason why I'm here. So I come from just outside Ballymena, up in County Antrim, sort of halfway between Belfast and the Giant's Causeway. And I thought I would just give you a wee bit about the farm. We're about 100 metres above sea level. I've been sheep only since 2004, and I went into Easycares in 2008. So you'll have a good idea that the farm is fairly sheep sick, because we don't do any rotation. It's grass. Oh, right. Is that better, Joe? It's grass and grass clover swards. The soil is reasonably fertile, and we're quite high in organic matter. So it's fairly wet with us, and the soil is a big sponge. So it's quite difficult to keep cattle, although there's quite a lot of dairying around us, but like most places the dairying is going and under the roof now because of the rain. So that's the farm, and just wanted to sort of give you an idea of the different fields, and to show that it's fairly intensive. A lot of them I subdivide with electric fencer and that, and use quite a bit of paddock grazing. And that sort of gives you an idea there. Move sheep probably about 4 days or so in each of the paddocks. Cut any excesses. I don't really have any areas for silage. I just cut any excess grass as and when. And I tend to stock, well, that's a bit extreme, but I do tend to stock them fairly intensive now. So my reason for saying all that is, there's not a lot of sheep I can keep in my system. I have tried most of the breeds, and most of them don't cope, in all honesty, because I'm fairly highly stocked, and the rain, the lush grass, and the dirty backsides and digging is a bit of a hassle. So over time I had to change my philosophy, because like yourself, the most important thing on your farm is you. And I'll always say, and any time I was ever talking to students or farmers in the past, you think about yourself, but not today. Think about yourself in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, and develop the system for whenever you are 10 or 20 years older. Like, there's no point of being 25 and developing a system for what you're like at 25, because by the time you reach 50, there's bits of you doesn't work the same. So you're looking for your sheep to improve as you kind of go downhill slightly. So over that period, I decided that I would move towards the Easycare, and a part of that was because I had a fairly sore back for a period of time, but Thankfully had an operation and that got a bit of steel work in the back's good now. But during that period of time I had a decision to make: either stop sheep or I went towards something that was easier to look after, and I went towards the Easycare. Those were the types of sheep at the start we had. Those were original imports from Scotland, and that was a ram from probably Campbell Tweed you might have heard of. And that was in around 2008, and 14, 15, 16 years breeding has brought me to there. So the type of sheep I'm into is a long sheep and a hair sheep. There was more wool cover in these, there were more wool shedding, and I'm now more towards a hair, a clean sheep. And a lot of that comes about because I want, basically clean back sides. I don't want dagging. So that's the aesthetic appearance of the sheep. I'm also a part, and somebody was asking earlier there's a UK Easycare Society, and hopefully in about 3 or 4 days there will be the Easycare Sheep Ireland, an affiliation to that society. And that's sort of coming about now. There are a group of breeders in Wicklow, and to be honest, slightly further afield. So we are developing a presence here in Ireland. Now, sort of in terms of the performance of these are some of the key factors. The ewes run around 70 kilos. If it's a tight year, they'll be as low as 66, 67, and in a good year they're up as far as 72, but they're running around 70 kilos on average across the flock. My flock's not massive, it's about 200 ewes and about 70 to 80 ewe lambs I run, but I suppose I'm running them over 45 acres, so it's fairly tight. The lamb down at just over 200%. This year there were 212. Slightly too many, to be honest, for an outdoor lambing system now, so I'm starting just to keep an eye on that. I don't really want them to be any more prolific. The lambs grow 200 grams a day until the end of August. Up until weaning we'll do about 270. The genetics does not limit my growth. My grass and the rain limits my growth. If it's a really, really good year, probably the last one we had was about 2,000, I'll push over 300 grams, or just about 300 up to weaning, but a typical year it's about 270. And one of the big benefits of them is I can lamb them outdoors and I only lamb about 6%. So that means I've 200 ewes, I lamb about 10 or 12 ewes. Probably 8 or 9 of those are because they're triplets coming backwards. If everything's coming right, the lamb away, no bother, lambs are up and sucked. I use Sheep Ireland, always have, ever since the beginning, and I'll basically breed to improve both the maternal and the terminal traits. You can see there, generally make quite good improvement. Probably I would say, if you're going to start your recording, David will talk about it later, I would say it's fair to say it takes about 5 years for the system to get to know your sheep. So at least stick with it for 5 years, and then after that you'll start to see the different bloodlines within your flock, and you'll start to ramp up the progress quite well. One of the big benefits I have always found about recording is the fact that it keeps you honest. It's very easy to get carried away with something that looks good and is actually pretty useless. And I've picked them sheep out, and others have come in the flock and looked and went, yes, there's great ewes, but they weren't producing enough, and the system picks that up. And back about 7 or 8 years ago, I started to notice this in the figures that my milk was going down. I wasn't noticing it in the field, I noticed it in the figures. Talked it over with the geneticist, and yes, the evidence was there, it was small, but if I had kept breeding the way I was, probably by now I would have had a flock with no milk, and it would have been over. So I started to rectify that, and now brought the milk back up again. And that's just one example. it's important to look at all these individual traits as well as the overall index, and no doubt David will cover that later. I'm kind of rushing through this, so I'm going to take the hat off. That was the Easycare hat. I'll maybe not just put on the Cotter one yet. I'll just do the bit about worms here. Just out of curiosity, does anybody here have worms that are basically resistant to Drench? Anybody, if you want to put your hand up, does anybody know they've got a problem? Good. Nobody? Does anybody know that they don't have a problem? No. Does everybody in the unknown? Yes, pretty much, right. Well, sadly, I actually knew I had a problem a long time ago. So what is that problem? Basically, I have worms on my farm that I can dose, and it doesn't make a damn bit of difference to them. You know, I think I said last night, it's a bit like you go out at the weekend with your mates, and there's always that one mate who can walk home without any problems, you know. Well, I have worms that can basically dander home after I give them a bloody good dose of Drench. Now, and worse than that, they're lucky enough and they can go home and breed, you know. And then we get more worms that are resistant to the Drench. And that's basically what resistance is. You put the drug in and it has no effect. Now, so why am I quite passionate about this? Well, I first started to look at worms and the whole anti-helminthic and Drench thing back in 2004, and then was a part of a project in 2006, which does make me feel pretty old, but the project, we basically looked at 8 farms throughout Northern Ireland, and they'll be glad to hear that I was outstanding in my field, because my farm had resistance to all 3 drenches. So basically the worms in my farm were able to withstand white drench, yellow drench and clear drench. So obviously alarm bells was going off in my head, but there was recommendations at that time, and thankfully, because the other big message at that time was coming out of Australia and New Zealand, where if you got this type of resistance, you stopped sheep farming, and places did stop. So one side of this I was thinking, am I going to have to stop sheep farming here? But thankfully I didn't, for I started and worked through these recommendations now. The first one was talk to my advisor. So basically I sat myself down and gave myself a good talking to. That's the first thing. The second was anything that was coming into the farm would have got quarantine drenches. Well, I was too late for that. So, you know, I will warn you, if you are bringing stock onto your farm, quarantine drench them. That's basically use an orange drench or a purple drench. I brought most of my resistance in a batch of 20 pedigree ewe lambs of a particular breed, where the breeder had dosed them for every 3 weeks within an inch of their life. And it just took them 20 sheep to wipe out my ability to use drenches, you know, efficiently. Then I also do fecal egg count reduction tests. I'll talk a wee bit about that in a moment. And we all think we dose correctly, but probably we don't. And that's maybe going back to this new gun where you're dosing to the right weight will be a good thing. The 4 recommendations that really got me sort of thinking was making sure I used the right drench at the right time. So now I use all 3 drenches during the year. This concept of just using white drench, white drench, white drench, or as happened whenever the clear ones come in, you just use clear, 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 is not a good policy. So you change them during the year. So that helps, and that was one of the things that I did was change during the year. So I now use white drench, yellow drench, and then to be honest, I'm probably using a knockout drench now, like an orange, sometime in August, just to clean out all the worms. So a tick to that, I was doing that. Only use when necessary. Wasn't sure how I was going to do that. Trying to keep worms on the farm that were still basically knocked out with the Drench. How was I going to do that? And then also reduce my dependence on drenches. So one of the first things you do, and I mentioned it earlier, there was a fecal egg count reduction test. And that's basically, you pick lambs, take a sample, a fecal egg sample, or a fecal sample and get an egg count on it, and then dose them, and then take another sample and see how many eggs is then in the fecal sample. And if there's no eggs in it, you know your drench has worked, and if there's some eggs in it, then you can work out what the kill rate basically was. And if it's less than 95%, your drug is no longer fully efficient. So I did quite a few of these over the years. As you can see, started in 2006, and the last one was 2021. And for white drench, I was killing in 2006 79% of the worms. In 2017, 49%. So the drench is only half what it should be. The yellow started in 2006 at 94%. We're now down to 66. Then we went back up in 21 to 85%. So there's something I've been doing that has helped there. And then the clear one has stayed somewhere between 70 and 60 over that period of time. So whilst it's not good, it's not bad. I've still got a certain amount of kill there. And there's something I'm doing, whether it's breeding more tolerant sheep, or whether it's with mixing, changing the drenches during the year, and that we've still got drugs that are reasonably useful. But in terms of the three ones that I was really focused on, using the drench only when necessary, adopting strategies to keep worms on the farm that were susceptible, and reducing my dependency. What that really meant to me was targeted dosing based on lamb performance, or at that time we called it targeted selective treatment. And the work for this, the underpinning work, was done in the 90s, I think in Moradin. And they basically took there, after doing a piece of work that showed that animals that were performing well did not improve with drenching. So if you had good growing lambs and you drenched them, that was kind of a waste of time. And the drench really only helped about 90% of the poor performing lambs. So what that told us was back then, if you had a way of identifying your good growing lambs, don't dose them. And if you didn't dose them, that meant you were using less drench, so you were only using drench when you need it. It also meant that those lambs had worms that were still susceptible because you weren't killing them to the drench. And it also meant that you were reducing the amount of drench you used and your dependency on it. So targeted selective treatment was the key way of delivering that. And I had a crack at it. And back in 2006, 2007, all that you could do was weigh lambs, write down a weight, work out how they were growing, and put a spray on them if you dosed them. And after about a summer, I had lambs that were red, white and blue, green, white and gold. They were every bloody colour under the sun. And I was sending me bits of paper trying to say, right, that lamb, yeah, I dosed that lamb 6 weeks ago. Yeah, it's growing kind of okay. Right, I'll not dose it. And then another one, I dosed that there 3 weeks ago. It's not growing, so I needed to dose it. And I had all this paperwork going on at the same time as it was wet and miserable, and I kind of gave up, in all honesty. So the theory was there, the science was there, but the practice wasn't. I couldn't get it to work in the field. And that was what really interested me when I started talking to Nick. Yes, the crate's fantastic, it's easy on you, you're not bending your back and you're working at your own height. But the SmartWorm allows me to dose the lambs that need dosed on my farm and let the other ones run through. And it's basically a wee app on the phone, and it either comes up green or red, so you have no thinking to do, you have no paperwork, it's a straightforward job. And in association with a few friends in Queen's University, we set up trials on the farm 2001, 2002, 2003, and I'll throw up a couple of bits of data here from 2022. And what did we really find? We found how the species of worms changed during the year. We're not working with the same worm throughout the year. And I also found out that the work in Morrigan was right in that lambs can thrive that have worms. So how does the worms change during the year? I'm not going to get into the details in terms of the different species, but from the 1st of June to the 22nd of August, you can see how at the start they're basically, say, blue worms. Then we come in with a wee bit of brown, light brown, then the lighter brown gets more, and there's some yellows. So you're not always working with the same worm, which is interesting because I don't think the blue ones breed with the brown ones, vice versa. So if I was to do a fecal egg count here and had resistance to the blue worms, that doesn't mean I would have resistance to the brown worms. So that started me thinking maybe a lot about the different times I had done fecal egg counts and things like that there, and maybe explain why sometimes I had more resistance than others. But the key bit to the work really comes up here in that we set up a trial in 22 to basically look at worms that I would have dosed as normal based on their fecal egg count, or worms that I dosed on how they were performing, whether the SmartWorm app told me I needed to dose them or not. And we set up a trial. There's about 112 lambs on it, born 28th of March on average weight almost 5 kilos. At birth, they were all balanced for number of twins, singles, triplets, etc. The start weight was 15.4 kilos, and at the end of it, the ones that were dosed pretty much every time according to the FEC weighed 38 kilos, and the ones that were dosed according to whether the SmartWorm told me yes or no was 37.5. Now, the big difference was these ones were dosed 530 times. There was sheep in that batch dosed, and there was 217 times in this batch. So there was a reduction of about 60% in the amount of dosing I done. So you can imagine how much less dose was used in the farm, and there was only a difference of less than half a kilo in the lamb weight. So I was ticking all my boxes in terms of preserving worms and using less dose, and not really having any big effect on the lamb performance. So that gave me the confidence then last year to just do them all target selective treatment, and that's what we did. And slightly different graphs, but basically what it shows is the live weight kept going up. Never so good if your lambs get smaller, so thankfully they always get bigger. The daily live weight gain was pretty much about normal. And in terms of what I dosed, just in this bit, I basically dosed them all for nematodirus with the white drench. Then I went on to the yellow in June and July, and I only dosed 17% of them in June, and then half of them in July. So there was a reduction of 65% in the amount of dose during that short period of time, and that was in one batch. And then the second batch, pretty similar. There's a 60% reduction. But what I will sort of say here is, if somebody had told me 4 or 5 years ago that I wouldn't dose a lamb from the end of May until damn near the end of July, I would have said no way, they would have been dead with me. I wouldn't have had the confidence to do it. And now I'm pretty much no problem. If they're growing well, let them run through. Now, that may be because for 14, 15 years I've been self-contained. I've bred sheep that can, cope with worms. I'll not say they're resistant because there's a pile of worms, but they seem to be able to cope with them. And those good growing lambs seem to be able to manage that immunity, so I can let them go through without needing to be dosed. So John, I'm coming near an end. Just hopefully I haven't, well I have ran over, sorry John. My conclusions: drench resistance does not mean the end of sheep farming. So, you know, if you find it, you can cope with it, you can work with it. I am proof of that. There's good principles there in stocks. If you look it up in Google, it gives you guidance and direction. But I would say a one-off fecal egg count is not much use. You need to build up a pattern on your farm over a period of time. So, you know, if somebody comes in and tells you to do one and you start to base the future on it, no. I think that would be foolhardy. I would say, to make life easier, use the technologies like SmartWorm apps and the automated gun. The SmartWorm app to me is easy used if you've all that, you know, the weighing equipment, and it gives you a very quick answer there and then, and it's not that expensive. The gun may be a bit more expensive, and you may maybe need to buy yourself it for Christmas or something, you know, as a present. But you know, the science behind it makes a lot of sense. And probably from my own perspective, if you can close your flock, not buy in as many females, and potentially buy rams that come off a fairly intensive system where worms is a problem, I think you will hopefully notice a difference in terms of the stock being more tolerant to worms. So that's pretty much me. I don't know if there's any questions anybody wants at this point, or will we wait to the end?
Yeah. Yeah, look, if you have any questions for Steven, we'll have a quick Q&A before we finish up. Just want to say a personal thank you. Steven came a very long way. He first came from, round of applause, please. Steven came all the way from Ballymena in Northern Ireland, drove down to Kilkenny for the first of this series, and then drove the 4.5 hours all the way up here. So listen, fair play to him, and thank you personally for all your help with developing the page and the app as well.